This is the Picard podcast on TV Podcast Industries. We're talking about the penultimate episode of Star Trek Picard, In Arcadia Ego, Part 1. Welcome back, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers. This is TV Podcast Industries, and we're talking about the penultimate episode of Star Trek Picard, In Arcadia Ego Part 1. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers. I am one of your other hosts, John. Welcome back, and I hope you are keeping safe during this time for sure.
Yes, definitely hoping you're keeping yourself safe. We're very lucky being podcasters, being able to stay indoors and do this and hopefully give you a little bit of entertainment while you're staying safe indoors. Huge thank you to all the people that are keeping things running, the people that are working the front line in hospitals and people that are working in grocery shops and the off license. Definitely thank you to those people as well, taking care of us while we're stuck indoors.
Yes, absolutely. It is a monumental effort at the moment, and we hope that in some small part we can provide you a little bit of entertainment as we discuss Star Trek Picard In Arcadia Ego Part 1. Yes, Part 1 of 2. It's a two-parter. It's a shame they didn't do these almost back-to-back in a sense. For sure. Yeah. But I suppose we will get into our spoiler-filled thoughts and discussion about all things Star Trek Picard Episode 9 in due course.
Yes, in a moment. Make sure that you stay subscribed to the podcast over on tvpodcastindustries.com. Loads of ways to subscribe to the podcast over there. We're almost finished our Picard podcasts, but as we mentioned before, we will be covering Penny Dreadful City of Angels. That's the next big show that we're going to be covering on our feed. We are currently covering it. You can get access to the podcasts that we've done on the first 3 seasons of Penny Dreadful over on our Patreon, where I think we're almost at the end of season 2 over there. Or you can go over to dreadfulpodcast.com, where we're putting out the individual episodes over there, just as a little taster for what's in store for Penny Dreadful. It's going to be a very different series, we understand, Penny Dreadful City of Angels, but it is being done by the same showrunner, so we decided to go back through all of the series of Penny Dreadful, and it's been great to go back through that.
Definitely. It's been really good to rewatch Penny Dreadful. It was, at the time, one of my favorite shows. I love all the references to the Victorian horror monsters.
Oh, yeah.
And I think John Logan does a great job of making it both Victorian, but also feel really fresh and, dare I say it, contemporary, although I suppose that's not what I mean. There are no iPads or mobile phones in Penny Dreadful. It's fresh. It's a real fresh take on these horror monsters, the stories that they have, and sort of the society, the Victorian society at that time, and how these misfits and creatures all fit into the great industrial age. So I'm really looking forward to covering City of Angels as well. I suspect that may take on a more 1930s detective gumshoe type investigation, set in California. Probably the horror aspect or the mythology or the lore will be coming from the Mexican mythology around Day of the Dead and all the superstitious elements that maybe originate from the ancient Aztecs, Olmecs, and so on of the Central American and the Southwest part of North America as well. So yeah, a great history there of intermingling cultures and their various different superstitions and mythology, from Christianity to Aztec through to the modern Americans coming in and taking Western America from Spain.
Yeah, it should be really interesting. And there are some connections there for Star Trek fans. We mentioned before that Harry Treadaway is in the first 3 seasons of Penny Dreadful. He's quite a central character, actually plays Victor Frankenstein in that show. And obviously he plays Narek here on Star Trek Picard. We also have Shazid Latif coming into the show in the third season of Penny Dreadful. He played Ash Tyler over on Star Trek Discovery, so an excellent actor, really good on Penny Dreadful as well. But in City of Angels, we've mentioned before that Brent Spiner is going to be over there, who plays Data and also is featured in this episode of Picard. He is not the only Star Trek alum that's going to be working on City of Angels as well. We've got Ethan Peck, who played Spock on Discovery, coming over to City of Angels as well. So loads and loads of Star Trek characters from some of the best shows coming over to City of Angels, which is cool.
Yeah, it'll be interesting times with City of Angels. But I think let's us get on to Star Trek Picard, Episode 9, In Arcadia Ego.
Yeah, lots of credits for this episode, slightly different to the previous episodes. The teleplay for this episode was written by Michael Chabon and his wife, Ayelet Waldman. The story was done by Michael Chabon, Ayelet Waldman, and Akiva Goldsman, who is the director of the episode. Akiva Goldsman once again directing this episode. So lots of people involved in this, all 3 of them involved in the story and in the episode itself. John, do you want to give us the official synopsis for the episode?
Sure. Following an unconventional and dangerous transit, Picard and the crew finally arrive at Soji's home world, Coppelius. However, with Romulan warbirds on their tail, their arrival brings only greater danger as the crew discovers more than expected about the planet's inhabitants.
A short synopsis for a very exposition-heavy episode, really. I suppose they didn't want to give away the exposition in the description of the episode mostly. But we're going to do, as always, we're going to talk about our 3 big moments from the episode, the 3 big things that we're normally talk about. We separate these out into the Prime Directive, the Omega Directive, and the Make It So number 1.
We must face the ramifications of the Prime Directive.
So, John, what's your big moment that you want to talk about from the episode?
I think for me, it is the quote, "For you a warning, for us a promise." It's the dual meaning of the admonition, or maybe you could argue the real meaning, since the originators of this message from prehistory or whenever they did it, it is aimed at synthetics. It is not aimed at organic life, and I thought this was a real nice touch, actually. We are introduced to Sutra, who is Janna's sister. Janna is the one who was killed on the orders of Commodore O with Rios's previous captain. And Sutra is introduced to us here on Coppelius, the synth world on Gulian 4. And I suppose just quickly before getting into the admonition, it's interesting because the synths here on Coppelius are very data looking. Yes. They are very much unlike Soji and Daj. It's almost like they are kind of a version 2 of these creations from Dr. Soong and Bruce Maddox, of course. It's like Bruce Maddox has added another layer or gone, that extra step to Dr. Soong's original plans in terms of how he created data. And so that's an interesting point, I think, here, because you're very much aware that Soji feels and looks different to the other synths on this planet. Yeah. But interestingly, there doesn't seem to be any kind of superiority from Soji. It does seem like a happy clappy family of synths here in their own little world. I do kind of quite like the nod back to sort of the original Star Trek and even the Next Generation, where this synth paradise, they're all kind of running around in the open, playing games and sports. And I remember you would see that with Captain Kirk and Jean-Luc Picard when they came to a assuming paradise.
Yes.
And
it looks exactly like something like that out of the 60s with all the hippies sitting around.
Yeah, exactly.
Playing chess and stuff. Yeah.
It's kind of a nice little touch, I think, to the 2 Star Treks there that, in paradise, everyone just plays games, and does sport because, Well, what else would you do?
Yeah. It's a weird one though, isn't it? Because, they're creating these amazing new species, effectively, these synths that can do whatever needs to be done. And they're just all sitting around as Dr. Sung and Maddox churn out more and more and more of these twin synths. It's kind of an odd one where you're kind of going, but why are you making more and more and more and more of them?
Yeah, it feels more like a hospital or an institute that or a boarding school where they're just forever going to be at this facility next to the lake on their homeworld. Yeah. But I suppose the interesting thing that comes from all of this is that Sutra then, this new synth that we're introduced to, does a mind meld effectively of Dr. Gerasi to effectively decode the admonition, since she goes, it was intended for synthetic minds, not organic, or she thinks it could be. So she tries it out with this mind meld on Gerasi. And the new interpretation of the admonition is actually very different. I quite liked how they did this, talking about the evolution of organics, but that they always sought perfection. Yeah. And so they created synthetics. But as they developed the synthetics, in order to see perfection, they noticed the imperfection and then ultimately the threat of these synthetic organisms from humans, Romulans, and the like.
Organics.
And so as a result, then it's that they begin to persecute the synthetics because of their superiority. And so this message has come from an alliance of synthetic life that is watching and effectively waiting to protect other synthetic forms of life, so that, and I love the quote that they go, their evolution will be their extinction. In that the evolution of the synthetic race will be the extinction of the organic race, as they will come to protect and effectively destroy organic life. And so, in one sense, this is the real meaning coming from this alliance of synthetic life that Sutra is able to glean from the message from the mind meld with Gerasi. But it is ultimately, it confirms the threat.
Exactly.
And the message that the Chad Vash and the Romulans have been interpreting, that they will effectively be the destroyers. And I kind of like this. I like the duality in the message, and ultimately, it leads to this discussion, on the synth homeworld about, fight or flight. Effectively two competing approaches. Picard is looking to get them all on a ship and to run, to keep them safe and to go on the run. And increasingly then, you see the other theory or the other approach coming to the fore, which is, well, why don't we just contact this alliance of synthetic life to come to our aid and to stop
of synthetic life.
Exactly, to stop the approaching Romulan warbird fleet that is intent on extinguishing this synthetic colony on Coppelius. And I liked how that all came together, to be honest. I really did.
Overall, not all of this worked for me as such, because as you're saying, the synths are going, no, that's not the meaning. You took the wrong meaning. It's just broken the minds of the organics that have connected with this admonition, this prediction of what's going on. They're not interpreting it correctly. The message isn't meant for them. And when you boil it down, the message that the organics, who are the Romulans, took from it is absolutely correct. They took correctly that by the evolution of organics creating these synths, that would lead to their destruction. And effectively what this new character of Sutra is saying is that's exactly what's going to happen. They're going to destroy all organics because they feel threatened. So I'm not too sure whether that explanation is clear enough in the episode. I'm not too sure whether that's coming across very well in the episode, because technically it's just two different people seeing their version of the same story, and both of them are absolutely correct as to what's going to happen. I do wonder who this federation of synths is. I wonder whether it is the Borg. I know they're part organic and part machine, but are they the protectors of all other synthetic life that they're going to come together, and it'll be Borg cube after Borg cube, and Borg Queen will arrive here to take out all the Romulans? Is that what's going to happen? Is that's why we've had so much connection to the Borg over the years?
I think that's really interesting to see what part the Borg will play in this. I think if they're a total neutral bystander, I think that'll be a disappointment. As to whether they had this alliance of synthetic life, I don't know.
But how do you trust the message?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, how do you know whether the message is coming from someone that has the synth's best intentions at heart? You know, we don't know that, and they don't know that either, but they're willing to trust this new species they've never heard of because the Romulans are coming into attack, I guess.
I think you're right. I think it's more that the synthetics here on Coppelius are taking it as that is the meaning, that there's a protection here. But I agree with you. I think it doesn't, it's not very clear. Both are right ultimately. And I suppose I kind of draw on this a bit more in my Omega Directive point, in terms of how it's all reasoned out. But, you know, I think for me, Sutra, I'm calling her the evil Soji, or maybe the evil Jana. How more can you make her seem a threat? But, you know, the dark hair, the red dress, those eyes, you know, it's very clearly signposted here. And I thought that was a bit too much. I always like the idea that danger, is hidden really from view, for sure. You know, and she seems quite, a powerful person here on this, synthetic homeworld. She certainly seems to be the leader of these synths here in this community. So, you know, it felt very much like they were looking back to, Data's evil, brother Law, here. I mean, if, Sutra had even just the inklings of a mustache, you would realize that she was evil, and the little goatee beard. It was a shame they really kind of made that so sort of on the nose, really, I think. I
think trying to squeeze all of this story in one episode as well is probably what caused that.
Yeah,
you know,
definitely.
She does a very traditional villain thing where she has one of the synths killed and then takes that as her rallying cry. You know, we've lost another one of our people because of trusting in the organics. Now we must rise up against them. And you're going, but you did that. If she hadn't let Narek out, Arcadia, the character that's supposed to be guarding Narek, wouldn't be dead. Maybe she's the one that killed her directly, or maybe Narek killed her himself, but she's using that to propel her cause forward. But there's a couple of other things in this scene, and I suppose you've taken quite a big moment from the episode to talk about, because it's quite near the end. A couple of things that in themselves didn't work for me a little bit, I suppose, because I felt they just felt so convenient and a little bit below what we've had this season in Star Trek Picard. The idea of having the son of Noonien Sung, the person who created Data in the past, we've never heard of a son before. And having him there feels a little bit fan-fiction-y. It feels a little bit like, oh, well, how do we get this character in that we know is dead? Oh, we'll have a son that nobody ever heard about before. He even uses the line, Brent Spiner uses the line going, he made me, but he created Data and never let me forget it. And you're kind of going, yeah, but if we'd seen that once before, if we'd seen maybe some point in the past that he had a son who he was giving out to because he's not as good as the son he created, you kind of go, okay, well, I can go with that as a plot point. But here, just introducing him and trying to force him into the story almost feels a little bit fanfiction-y. And then the other thing, and this is probably very nerdy and a little bit nitpicky of me, but the idea of the synthetic being able to do the mind meld feels like a get out of jail free card when they wrote themselves into a corner, but doesn't feel like something that should be possible. This has only been done on screen, I think, from Vulcans in the past. It's only been something in Vulcans, and this season we've been asked to accept that a half Romulan, half Vulcan can do it. Totally understandable. There's an explanation there as to why she's half Vulcan, so she's able to do it with Commodore O doing the original mind meld. And now we're being asked that a synthetic who is putting her hands in the same place as a Vulcan is and saying the words, my mind to your mind, my thoughts to your thoughts, would be doing a mind meld. A mind meld is supposed to be a meeting of minds. One's a digitally created mind merging with a human. So it feels a little bit odd.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. This didn't feel as though it was possible, to be honest. And, you know, for whatever about doing and practicing some of the other things that maybe don't require this physical, emotional side of it, then of Vulcan culture. It to me, it is a little of a step too far. I mean, I could even believe more that Soji could do it because she seems like that next level version of synth, that they have used organic processing. I mean, it is almost like the God creating life in terms of what Bruce Maddox has done with Darsh and Soji.
Yeah.
And because the synthetics on Coppelius look so much like Data, you just feel they're of that era and that they wouldn't be able to do it. Now, I was trying to rack my brain to see whether Data at some point was involved in a mind meld, but I don't think he was. Yep. And this did seem kind of overly sort of definitive. It would have been better for me if Sutra had kind of said, well, tell me the story and from Jurati, and when she did that, that maybe, just maybe, rather than the idea that, you know, the organics couldn't figure out the message, because they quite clearly could, she goes, maybe from another perspective, it's this, you know, that she kind of runs the processing of what could this potentially be meaning, and saying, well, actually, this could be coming from a different direction, that they're here to protect us, that it's not organic life warning organic life, it's synthetic life warning synthetic life, and we will be your protectors rather than the destroyers. Yeah. So it would have been better if they'd gotten to it through logic.
Absolutely. I think one of our fellow listeners did suggest the idea that maybe Jurati was created by Bruce Maddox and she's also a synthetic. And there it would have worked in this scene. That would have worked really well if she was a synthetic who had this information uploaded into her and then it got downloaded by Sutra. But the idea that she's able to learn the Vulcan mind meld, which is something that, again, feels very specific to the Vulcans in the past, and just saying a character can do it now, I just don't understand that. I feel it needs a little bit more preparation or a little bit more information behind it to be able to use it as something that the character could do. Now, again, we've said before, we've watched every episode of all the Star Trek shows, and some of us have read some of the books and that kind of stuff, but there may have been other instances of this in the past. It just felt like an odd thing to use in this particular episode. There's other ways around it, I suppose, that would have made it a little bit easier. I know you've taken this as a different point, John, but there's just quite a lot wrapped up into it.
No, absolutely. I think the thing is that I loved a lot of the individual scenes and elements within this episode. The problem for me was that the episode more generally and kind of overarching, it just felt it needed to be spread out a bit more. Right. I think only coming to Coppelius now in a part 1 of 2, the final 2 episodes, it's just like they had to rush everything, you know, so they really had to signpost that Sutra was evil. They really had to have a quick way of having this information that actually the admonition was a warning to synthetics from other synthetics. Whereas I just feel if they had arrived on this planet a bit sooner, you know, it could have even just an extra episode or 2, you know, or 1.5. So you could just see Sutra's development in terms of how she's coming to the conclusion that she's coming to, where it's like, it just happens, you know, and yeah, I just felt you needed more time on Coppelius, to be honest, because even just to figure out, well, are these synths versions of Data? You know, are the older versions, compared to Soji? Just something like that, because, it seems like they are. And it's one of those things where there's so much exposition in this episode for other purposes that the information you need just about those scenes, about the society that they've just been dropped into, has kind of been lost. So they default to the quick things. This is a paradise, therefore they all play games. Right. This is evil Jana or evil Soji, therefore, you know, she looks a bit shifty and she's got the, you know, the dark hair and the red dress.
But the concept itself is a sci-fi shorthand, you know.
It is.
It's taken from, you know, Terminator, the idea that, you know, humans create robots kill humans. That's kind of the cycle of life almost. You create it, it gets better and better and better until the point they realize we're better than you, so we'll kill you. Detroit Become Human, the video game, had the same kind of premise. Many other sci-fi shows, Battlestar Galactica is another one.
Absolutely.
Loads and loads have used the concept. So if you're going to use it again, bring it in earlier, as you say, bring it in earlier in the season so that you can explore it a bit more, because here it just feels like they've all turned in this episode, and some of the things feel very odd usage in there. I suppose some of the things that I thought were interesting about it, just to give it some positive, I suppose, the idea that you have Daj and Soji able to blend in with other humans is a remarkable achievement that they've done. Everybody else there is like Data. They walk into a room and you instantly go, well, that's a synthetic, because they have the skin of a synthetic.
Yeah.
Whereas Daj and Soji are able to blend in. They're showing you here with the cat, with Spot 2, that's in there. They're showing you we can also create cats that are exactly like human cats. We're that good at this technique now.
Human cats or feline cats?
Feline cats or human cat, earth cats, let's say. That's the difference. They're showing you that they can create pretty much anything that will look exactly like it does when it's not being created. That's a massive step away from where we were in Star Trek The Next Generation, where, as I say, Data walks into a room, everybody knows he's the synthetic. So explore that a little bit, rather than throwing all of this at us and then suddenly they turn on the humans and humans are kind of going, but that's what we thought you were going to do anyway, because we got this warning.
Yeah, I mean, weirdly, in a serialized 10-parter, they've really, and this may be good for some people, they've really taken it back to an episodic thing. This could have been a standalone episode. Ship arrives at new homeworld, its first contact. It is not what it appears from first initial contact, and the people that have arrived from the spaceship have been put in danger, or, they've turned on them. This could be straight out of the original Star Trek, or even The Next Generation. Absolutely. In terms of the episodic nature. So, in that sense,
absolutely is, yeah.
So in that sense, it's fine. But they've been building to this with 8 other episodes, and it felt like a drop to me, quite frankly. So, yeah. But I did like this duality of the admonition. I thought that was really nice, to be honest.
Yeah, I've kind of already gone over my Prime Directive in this point, because it was the introduction of Alton Inigo Soong and Spot 2. The idea that these two people that would be recognizable are there. Great to see Brent Spiner obviously taking on this role, another character for him to play, and hopefully we'll see him again as the show goes on. Just felt like it came a little bit out of left field, that you kind of go, okay, we've never heard of the character, but it's a nice contrivance that we have this person available that's able to build the bodies while Bruce Maddox builds the minds, I suppose.
Definitely. And I must say, even though, yeah, you're right, this character of Dr. Alton Inigo Soong does come a bit out of left field. I do like the way Brent Spiner plays him. I always liked it when Data went evil. I think Brent Spiner can do kind of evil, or dare I say it, threatening really well. And I do like the moment where he kind of sides with the synthetics as effectively their sort of de facto father, and really, in a sense, admonishes Jean-Luc Picard. I think that's really, really good. So absolutely love the performance that Brent Spiner puts in here.
Definitely. Also have to say, I love the giant flowers that are used by the planet as the defense system. I think
great.
That's really cool. That's something completely different.
Really good.
Haven't seen that before, and actually seems to work very well in the show.
It reminded me of the spaceships that unfurl the big sails to capture the solar winds, as well. Like in Star Wars Episode 2, it was Count Dooku's ship, and in the ship Icarus in the movie Sunshine, done by Danny Boyle. That's a great movie as well. Really good movie. For sure. But it almost reminded me of those, to be honest. I love the visual of these orchids, these flowers. So I felt they were more like big lilies actually coming out from the atmosphere of Coppelius to sort of cover and wrap around the ships in order to cut all their electrical energy, and so sort of plunge them into darkness. I thought it was really good. And then they were almost like re-entry cushions for those ships as they brought them back down.
Yeah.
It kind of buffeted them from the re-entry into the atmosphere of Coppelius. Yeah, that was a great visual, I thought.
Absolutely, as they burnt up as well on the way in through the atmosphere. It's quite cool. That's it for our main points.
Implement the Omega Directive immediately.
John, what's your media moment that you want to talk about for the episode?
My Omega Directive point is, it comes back to my Prime Directive, actually. You know, we kind of went from bienvenue or welcome, to house arrest for Jean-Luc Picard.
We're all feeling a bit of that at the moment.
Yeah, well, exactly. Very, very, very quickly. And I suppose that's just more the episodic element of this, this particular episode. But I did like the discussion between Picard and Soji around the logic of sacrifice. You know, as effectively the synthetics go to call their protectors, as Sutra and the synths effectively go against Picard's approach, which is to take flight. They want to fight with the help of this new information around a protective synthetic alliance or federation that will come to their aid. You know, but I thought Soji and Picard's discussion about sacrifice, you know, the idea to kill or die to save others, and in this sense, it is to kill organics in order to save inorganic life, I thought was really nice. Picard has a great word. You know, it's effectively killing to survive, but he says it depends on if you're holding the knife or not. You know, it starts from this point that there is no logic to sacrifice. Yeah. But ultimately, you know, it's the opposite of logic. It's all done around fear. And they bring it back to Jurati's killing of Bruce Maddox as well. And, you know, Picard says, or did Jurati have no choice? You know, was there some kind of axe hanging over her to do this? You know, she sacrifices her former lover so that other organic life will survive. And here now, Soji and Sutra, are trying to figure out whether, you know, it is inescapable that the logic is to, ask for the protection of this ancient synthetic alliance. And she goes to Picard to have that discussion. I think it's a really interesting one around sacrifice, you know.
Absolutely. Because I would argue that Star Trek came up with one of the best descriptions of the logic of sacrifice, the idea of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one, as we hear from Spock back in
definitely.
Khan, I think it is, when he sacrifices himself to save everybody. That's the logic of sacrifice. I will sacrifice myself so everybody else can survive. And Picard kind of flips that on its head and goes, it really depends on your perspective and how you're looking at it. If you're going to sacrifice yourself, who are the many that you're saving, and are they worth saving, is almost the concept of it. Are you holding the knife, or is somebody else holding the knife saying you must sacrifice yourself to save all of us? Are they worth saving? Do you know them well enough? Is kind of the concept. So it's interesting to go back to one of the central tenets, I suppose, of Star Trek's ideals and ideology, and kind of have another look at it from another perspective. I don't think Picard is saying that it's different to that idea of the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. I don't think it's different to that. It just depends on who is the few, and is somebody forcing you to do something at the point of a knife, or...
Well, exactly. And in this case, you know, with Spock, that was his personal sacrifice. What Sutra is coming at it from is that the sacrifice is all organic life for the sake of effectively, 50 synthetics on Coppelius. So the point being
or
that...
a lot more.
Or a lot more. Or the point that what Picard is saying is that this is not sacrifice. This is about war, effectively. Because you're holding the knife and saying, well, the needs of us outweigh the needs of you. And yeah, I thought it was just a really nice moment between these two, Soji and Picard, having that discussion on Coppelius. And I spinning out of that, I like how they go against Picard, and coming back to Brent Spiner's portrayal of Dr. Altan, Picard tries to make his point. He's giving one of his speeches, and Dr. Soong goes, they've never seen anything like this before. Yeah. You are this curiosity. You do it with such conviction, such eloquence. You give it such force. And you're saying that they will listen to you this time, but they didn't previously after the attack on Mars. You will have us doubting ourselves and losing our own conviction. As they really kind of make the point to Picard that they are not going to take his approach and take flight. They will fight with the help of this alliance. And even Soji chimes in with, this isn't the Romulan rescue. We can't be your means of redemption. You know, Picard is still looking for that redemption that we saw in those initial comics, and the initial episodes of this series around the supernova affecting the Romulans. He's looking for redemption. This is his redemption story. And Soji is saying, we can't be your redemption. And so they turn against Picard to put him under house arrest. After only saying bienvenue and welcome earlier in the episode, which I loved Arcana's touching of Picard when she looks at him and goes, Admiral Jean-Luc Picard, you know, you were the captain to Data. And I love her tracing his lines on his face and just saying how much they imply grief, endurance. I thought that was a really nice moment. But they all know him as well. And
they recognize him, yeah.
But ultimately, by the end of it, Sutra, and even Soong realize that he could be bad for them because he will get them doubting themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I thought that was just really, really good. I thought it was a great performance from Patrick Stewart and all of them. I thought it was really good.
Speaking of which, that's my kind of medium moment for the episode, my middle moment for the episode. The performance of Patrick Stewart in this episode, where we have his reveal to everybody about how serious his illness is. Firstly, the fact that he has an illness and that how serious it is. It feels like all we ever do is say goodbye moment, I suppose. We have had that with Seven earlier on in the season. He said goodbye to her once, and now he's saying goodbye to her a second time when she appears for about 5 minutes in this episode. But overall, this whole idea that we have Picard getting kind of knocked unconscious after the initial attack by Narek. We have him knocked unconscious. He has that weird moment, which I'm only going to just put a pin in and say it must be explained in the next episode, where he speaks as if another voice is coming out of him saying, thank you for coming, everyone, as if he's speaking at his funeral or as his goodbye party or something like that.
Yeah.
And then he wakes up with Agnes standing over him, realizing that she's done a scan and found his Uramatic syndrome, this disease of his mind or his brain that he has. And he has to kind of line the whole crew up and tell them what's really wrong with him, that he knows he has this brain disease. It's never caused any kind of issues before, but he's been told that it is terminal now and there's nothing that can be done about it. I really like this scene, this moment where he's saying to everybody, and if anybody treats me like a sick man, you'll make me really pissed off, basically.
Yeah, it's great.
Love that. Love this moment with Elnor. I did get a little tear in my eye. I have to say the performance of the two of them together, where Elnor's kind of going, I know all we do is say goodbye, but this feels more permanent because, well, you're dying. Another moment of the candor of Elnor, where he's telling him exactly how he feels. And the response from Picard is, I'm very, very proud of you. And it's a lovely moment.
It really is. Yeah.
Father and son, I suppose, where they're kind of saying possibly goodbye for the final time.
I loved all of that, both with Picard, Elnor, and 7 of 9 as well. I just thought it was really, really good.
Yeah, where he tells 7 after she says, keep saving the universe, and he goes, well, that's your job now. So possibly setting her up for her role in season 2.
Yeah, definitely.
Goes off to save the universe, joyriding her Borg ship, possibly, full of some of the XBs.
Hotwire.
Exactly. I really liked these moments with Picard. You know, we do have another moment that didn't hit the way it should have, though, that came out of this, which is the moment with Raffi, where she is giving Picard a hug and telling him that she loves him. And the reason it didn't work for me is I don't understand the words that she says to him. She says to him, you've done so much for me, Picard, and I want to tell you that I love you. Now, I know he's a dying man, and I know he said this to her, but the experience that we've seen of the character of Raffi since the beginning of the series is that Picard left her on her own for 15 years. And I don't see what he's done in the stuff that's happened on screen in this series that would make her say something like that. It probably would have worked better if the character said, even though things haven't been great with us over the last few years, I still love you and I still respect you and I'm sorry about what's happening to you. Something like that. But it felt like a weird line to say, you've done everything for me. I love you. I felt odd.
Yeah, no, I mean, to be honest, I absolutely loved Raffi in this. I liked how she was feeling sad when Picard kind of brought the subject up in La Sirena, in the Borg cube.
Yeah.
You know, you could sense her downward spiral, knowing that someone that she respects and has worked with and has cared for and still does to some extent, is saying goodbye. But I think the Raffi goodbye where she says, you know, I'm going to break the rules of what you've asked us to do. You know, she gives him a really nice hug and I thought it was really nice. But as you say, it was really strange. Because I actually think it's the writers in this case. I think in that scene, Michelle Hurd and Patrick Stewart do absolutely nothing wrong.
Yeah.
But for the sake of saying, despite everything between us over these last 10 years, with what went down after the attack on Mars, you know that I've always still got your back, or I still care for you, and I will always respect you. And I was just getting back to that point before with you, and it's so upsetting for me to lose you now. You know, something like that. It literally required just a couple more lines or something,
or just different intention behind
yeah,
it. The characters have been so far apart for the last few episodes. She's part of the crew, and we know that makes her feel really happy. She's finally solved this big mystery that she's had for so many years. But Picard wasn't really involved in that at all.
No.
So I don't know what he's given to her as such.
No, exactly. So I think I think that required the writers to just think a little bit more about what these characters have been doing in the previous 8 episodes. And that's a little annoying for me because it undercut that situation because it took you out of it. It was like, I don't feel that Raffi would have said it like that to Jean-Luc Picard, given what we've learned since episode 1 through to episode 8 and how they've been interacting, because it's been very businesslike. You know, she has a soft spot for her.
Absolutely.
You know, she's upset that he's leaving her, but she has to cover the fact that he left her for 10, I think it's 15 years. And hadn't been in touch to her, because otherwise that moment where he arrives on her doorstep and she tells him to go run and jump. Well, what's that about then? She should have just been all in with him right from the get-go.
And that's why it's weird, because this isn't a 22 episode series written by multiple people. Michael Chabon wrote most of the episodes of this series, as we've talked about. So he knows these characters better than we do. He's writing them that way. So it feels like an odd piece of dialogue that he would have put in one of their mouths. So, I don't know.
Yeah, look, it is what it is. As I say, I think the two actors do really well with it. And I actually... And
there's so many great moments from Patrick Stewart about this as well. So, so I'm glad that the idea that he will be dying soon, that it's a terminal illness, I'm glad that those ideas are there. And those scenes with all of the rest of the cast, I'm glad that they're all in there. Just that one particularly struck me as a bit odd. Right. So theory time at this point. Picard has an incurable disease. He did take a little detour with number 1 and Deanna Troi a few weeks ago over on another planet, where they told him about their sad loss of their son, who had an incurable disease, which may have been cured if there were synthetics with brains available that some work could be done on to cure their son. Do we think there's a cure coming for Picard? because there are now synth brains to test on.
Yeah.
Though synth ban is out there, we have now a planet full of synthetics who could be used for some testing to see if they could cure Picard, if only they could work together, if only they could get over their challenges and problems. Could they help cure Picard? Or has somebody already been working on that cure?
Well, exactly. Like, that seems more likely than what I was also thinking, because we get introduced to the golem that is kind of in stasis, in incubation. Dr. Soong shows this to Dr. Jurati and says, I need your skills. How about, this is your redemption after killing the bright light that was Bruce Maddox. You can now create life rather than destroy it. And she goes, oh, you have a golem. Whilst Dr. Soong is very much about doing the physical form, it was Bruce Maddox that could do the mind transfer. So I did wonder in this moment whether we would have a Soji-like Jean-Luc Picard, but I don't think that is going to be the case.
Yeah, it's I think the discussion that happens is that Maddox was the one that used to work on the actual creation of the brain, creation of the thoughts and the personality and all that kind of stuff. Soong is the one that does the body. But together they were working on the idea of a mind transfer, and all I could think of was there's 3 candidates in my mind as to who would be filling up the golem. One possibly is Picard.
Yeah.
I don't know why Soong would decide to choose Picard, even just after meeting him once in this episode. He's a great guy and all, but I don't know whether he'd been working on this body and then would give it to Picard to...
Oh no, I definitely don't think that's going to be the case. I just thought it'd be interesting if in season 2, Picard is, Robo Jean-Luc.
Absolutely, the RoboCop of the universe. Yeah. The other question is maybe it's Soong. Maybe he wants to extend his own life by putting his mind into this body. Maybe there's something there. He says something about he can feel the pressure of time coming on.
The urgency of it.
The urgency is there. And then the other option is his partner in the creation of all of these synths. Bruce Maddox, his body is close by. Potentially they had a backup of his mind in case they ever solved the issue of doing this mind transfer into one of these synthetics.
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm thinking those are the 3 options, either Soong, Picard for some reason, or Bruce Maddox to bring him back so that he can continue his work ad infinitum. Maybe that's jumps the barrier of death effectively. So I thought that was interesting. So that's another theory that we have. I don't know whether it'll be solved next episode, but it felt like you don't waste any time in a TV show, right? Why would you waste time when you only have 40 minutes or 50 minutes of a TV show? It seemed like a very specific conversation between Dr. Jurati. She is kept out of prison, remember, to help him work on whatever it is that they're working on. So potentially they are working on something very specific, and we heard about it in this episode. So I'm expecting we'll hear about the rest of that in episode 10, in the finale of the season. So
make it so, number 1.
John, your number 1. What's the small moment you want to talk about from the episode?
It's actually that, Narek is captured. He is then released by Sutra, but we see him towards the end running towards the Borg ship. And I thought that was an interesting choice because I didn't quite know why. He would be heading towards a ship filled with people that effectively the Romulans have been harvesting. There is 7 of 9 there, although maybe he doesn't know that. And Elnor. And I just wondered what reason he had, or maybe his ship is somewhere in between and we just don't know. We don't see his ship and how that has sort of fared during the great flower power return to solid ground. But it's just that moment of Sutra releasing Narek here. I do like the point where she makes, I had to control my urge, or I wondered whether I could control my urge to kill you with what I need you to do. So he's off to do something. You think, or is he? Why would someone who is part of the Chadvash, who has been doing this mission to destroy synths, go and do something, that would help the synths, unless it is the counterintuitive thing. And it must be. And I suppose we'll only fully find out in part 2.
In the next episode.
Is he running to the Borg ship or back to his own? It just so happens that the Borg ship is there. Or is there something on the Borg ship that the synths need in order to create this beacon that they have to do to ask for this help from the Synthetic Alliance?
See, that's the thing that slightly played into my theory that the Synthetic Alliance is the Borg, because I was kind of going, oh, he's got to go there and set up this beacon for them, which will contact the Borg. But you're absolutely right. Why would Narek work for them? He's on his own and escaped. Either they kill Narek, or he tries to kill them again and dies in the process. Why would he help them? He doesn't want them to survive.
Yeah.
He wants the invasion of the Romulans to arrive and kill them all. So I didn't really understand that idea when Sutra says to him, do you want to get out effectively? I've overcome my urge to kill you, and I need your help at this specific moment. She can't trust him, right? She knows that he's there to kill them. So I don't know, but we'll find that out next episode. But I know what you mean. By the way, looking at my notes here, it was Saga that was killed by Narek, not Arcana.
Yeah.
So I had that wrong.
Saga being her twin.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So loads of twins, loads of names. Difficult to put them all together. But yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I did like the vision, I suppose, or the scene, I suppose, of Narek walking or running towards the Borg ship.
Well, he was more skipping, I thought. He did seem to have a little, a jumpy run. I thought it was like he was drunk slightly.
Maybe he's under the control of the synths somehow. Maybe he's got some kind of potion that they give him to control his mind. Maybe. I have another question as well for my final small moment for the episode. Just because I don't know what it meant. It's when Soji returns and they're all talking to her. And remember, Soji's an unreliable narrator here because she doesn't get all of her memories back until things happen. I suppose she says it's like. A hollow, so a movie. It's like seeing a movie for the second time and not really remembering it, is the way that she said it. You have an idea of all the parts of the film, but you can't put them all together, right? That's the way she says it. But the discussion that she has with the synths, and they go, did you accomplish your mission? Oh, your face tells me that something bad's coming. And I'm going, what was her actual mission?
Yeah.
Do we know what her mission is? Do we have any moments where she says, my mission was to learn all about what was happening with the Romulans and then find information about the admonition? Is that what it was? Because I think even Dr. Sung calls out that they've taken away so much of her mind or so much of her memory that she doesn't know that she holds secrets for the synths. She didn't know that she was synthetic even up until like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Ago. So I'm kind of going, what was the mission that they actually gave her to do? They keep saying to her how great it is that she's come back with information. Is that all it was? Was her mission to gather information on the outside world to bring back to them to make the synths know whether they can trust organics? I'm giving the show a lot here because none of this is in the show itself. But it was a big question for me where they said to her, did you accomplish your mission? Are we supposed to know exactly what her mission was from the show, or did I miss something?
No, it's really unclear. It was a really bad throwaway line. And it's a shame because you're right. She didn't even know she was synthetic until a few episodes ago. Yeah. This was all a surprise. And you're right. She could have just been recording all this data that she needed to come back. But even then with Sutra, and with all the other synths, they didn't even know that there was a Romulan fleet heading to exterminate them until they were informed by Picard. So, like, it's not like the mission was there to prevent what's happening because they didn't even know about the admonition. So,
exactly.
What is her mission? Was it a mission of intel? I mean, it just seems really just weird.
Did they go a different route because of the death of the previous synths that had left their home world? Did they go a different route to embed her to find out whether they could reach out again? Is that what it's supposed to mean? But it just felt like an odd line and just left me with a question. So I don't know. Maybe next episode we're going to get half an episode of the flashbacks to all of the Soji Dodge history and what happened to them, why they were sent, where they were sent, that kind of stuff. Maybe that was the setup that we just didn't get in this episode, but it just struck me as a very odd line, I suppose, in the episode. Anything else from the episode we need to talk about?
Isn't there something else you have to do?
John, anything else?
Just the title, In Arcadia Ego. which basically is Latin for even in Arcadia there am I, the I being death. So this was really kind of interesting because there are a number of paintings that are entitled there are a number of paintings with this as their title, which basically show shepherds of Arcadia in Greece, which was supposed to be this rural idyll. In one of the paintings, the shepherds are next to a tomb, and the other, they're looking at a skull on the ground. And it's basically that even in paradise, death is here. It is related to that memento mori, this idea that death is the great leveler. It comes to everyone, even in paradise. And I thought that was kind of nice. You know, we have come to this supposed synth paradise, yet death is coming to Coppelius in the form of Romulans, or dare I say it, in the form of this synthetic alliance.
Death is coming to the organics because of this.
Exactly. So it's the inescapability from death. It happens, even, dare I say it, maybe for the synthetics, at least for Saga.
Yeah.
I think she did die, although I was wondering how a glass hummingbird through the eye would kill her. I presume they just take the eye out and replace her and reboot.
Maybe
turn her off, turn her on again.
Maybe the glass hummingbird went all the way through to her
neural network.
Maybe something like that. Maybe it's the flaw in the design, perhaps. But yeah, death is there in paradise. A couple of little notes from me. I just had to point out the maggoty rotting fox that was in the admonition, because we saw that every single episode of True Blood. It was in the opening credits sequence of True Blood. It looks exactly the same. It's just repurposed for this vision in the admonition. So I thought that was just stood out to me, I suppose. One of the things that was in the admonition, if you noticed, there's an eyeball in there that has the Federation symbol in there, which I think is one of the reasons why the Romulans were specifically resistant to the Federation using synths to help them get out of their system. And that's why there was so many attacks and so much fighting going on with the Romulans, is because they'd seen this prediction of, this is exactly the way that would go down. The Federation will help you out. They will use synthetics, and then that will spell the end of all of the organics. I think that's what it's trying to say in the vision. Just thought that was a little interesting little touch.
Yeah, so that's why they had to attack Mars. That's why Commodore O, after the Shad Vash had seen that image, and said, we need to go to the human world of Mars.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's what I think it's from. And only one that I had to look up, because it felt like it was telling you to go and Google some Star Trek episodes, when Raffi says about, we could be going outside and there could be angry reptiloids or homicidal fungus, is what she says outside. It's a thing, she says, she insists. So go Google it, people, if you want to know what that is. The angry reptiloids, I thought that might be a reference to the Gorn, the reptiloid creature that Captain Kirk fought against in the original series. We already had references to that throughout this series. It's one of the most well-known episodes of the show, for good reasons and bad reasons. I suppose the guy in a reptile suit is made fun of over the years as to what he looks like, so maybe that's the reason why it stood out. The homicidal fungus, that one I really didn't get. I had to search for this one, and the idea is a reference to a Star Trek episode where a fungus has taken over the food of people, and one of their leaders has to kill off some of his people because of the fungus. So the fungus has turned him homicidal. I think that's what it's a reference to, but I'm not 100% sure. If you have any other ideas where it came from, fellow listeners, just email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. John, overall, I think we've been whipping this episode a little bit. So I'm intrigued to know, what did you think of Star Trek Picard episode 9 overall?
Yeah, I mean, I really thought the episode was fine. And it's a little bit of a shame. This needs to be ramping up, and you have a part 1. You really want this to be full throttle going into part 2, even that you can look at part 1 and part 2 sort of almost right after part 1. This was the wrong time to introduce Coppelius, to be honest. I think it should have been introduced episode 7 or halfway through episode 7, maybe even at the start of episode 8, where you could have had that, and you could have built up the tension a lot more. You know, these synthetics are very, in a sense, they know a lot, but they're naive, and they have been isolated in this distant world from all other contact. I kind of wanted to see them not panicking, but in effect, just being caught between what they had to do. I wanted to see Sutra become evil, not just be plonked into the episode as evil. In the same way as I wanted to see Dr. Inigo soon go from welcoming Picard to effectively undermining him. I wanted to see how that played out. It just felt way too quick and way too condensed. Yet I did like all the individual things here, but I think this is why I'd give it 3 space flowers out of 5.
Ooh, yeah.
It's still a recommend. I just think it almost feels like this should have been an earlier episode.
Yeah. Do you think we as the audience could have gone to this planet on our own early on in the season? Because I don't know whether the reveal is enough to have to wait for the 9th episode and Picard to arrive there, because we'd kind of been told that there was a synth homeworld from episode 2 of the show. From Narek and Narissa, we'd been told there was going to be a synth homeworld. So it revealing in episode 9 that there is a synth homeworld and it's full of synths isn't as revealing if you know that information. So could we have gone there earlier on in the season and met Dr. Sung and met Bruce Maddox in flashback, maybe doing their work building the synths?
Exactly. Or
in like episode 4 or 5, so we can kind of know the society maybe.
I think so. Or even if they had just sped up some of the memories returning to Soji, you could have just done it through that.
Maybe.
You know, when around the table with Riker and Diana, that as soon as the homeworld was named by their daughter, that it kind of came flooding back, and you got some exposition there around it. I didn't mind this episode at all. I just felt it was in the wrong place at the wrong time, with not enough urgency given the Romulan fleet bearing down on them. And I just felt that, if anything, it was down to some of the writings. You know, Picard suddenly almost speaking this in tongues, as they arrive at the planet. I know that's to do with his brain abnormality, but it just was like, it just kind of, has he just done that?
I want to thank you for coming, everyone. The line says,
It was like he was at a seance and he'd just been possessed. Yeah. And I thought, was it something to do with the synths? And it took me out of it. I think Raffi, her goodbye was nice, but it was just strange. It was off point. And it just didn't feel right. And in the same way that Sutra, understanding the admonition from Jurati was done through effectively an organic mind meld rather than her processing the information to say, well, what if it's coming from another point? And kind of working that out. And I think if we'd been there earlier and you had the Borg cube there, they know that's there. And if it is something to do with the Borgs, that she finds more information from, it feels like they've set all this up. And effectively now, we've got less than an hour to get to a big, presumably world battle of some description with the Romulans and maybe this alliance, and understand what's Soji's mission. Why is Narek doing what? I mean, I'm sure it will make sense in part 2. And I think maybe that's why I needed to go straight into part 2.
Yeah.
I think if you're going to call episodes part 1 and part 2, and given this is on CBS All Access, they could have just released it.
Yeah.
Then
I wonder, is it just a reference to the Best of Both Worlds, which was the finale of one season, and then the part 2 was the start of the next season? I think that's the episode. If I've got
maybe.
I think it was just a reference, because the end of the episode is the Romulans bearing down on the planet and they're about to attack, kind of thing, and then come back next week for the attack and the battle.
It could be, yeah.
But for such an episode that's full of exposition, full of detail that we could have gotten earlier on in the season, as you say, it feels like a slightly underwhelming episode in how they dealt with some of the issues that were there, having characters appear for a minute or two to say hello and then disappear and say goodbye, all that stuff feels a little bit, just weighted wrongly, in the episode. But as you say, John, one of the things about doing weekly podcasts about a show is we're going to watch the last episode, and that might completely change our opinion of how this episode, we might not care about this episode next week when we get a completely different episode or a better episode, we might never remember whether this was good or bad.
Exactly.
But I think overall, as a rating of this particular episode, it's one of the weaker ones for the season, and that's not great at the end of the season.
No, it's not. I mean, I did like a lot of things, and I thought the actors, it was good. I actually feel it's the showrunner and the writing actually for this one. That's where my complaint on this lies, to be honest.
Yeah, we'll see how it works out in the final episode of the season. Let's get on to a little bit of feedback. If you want to send in any thoughts on any of the shows that we cover, you can email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or you can join us over in our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tvpodcastindustries.
Yeah, we got some feedback through from Facebook from Jim Carey. Jim goes, well, they can't all be episode 8. Spoiler alert for Battlestar Galactica, the series reboot. I kind of saw it happening, but now it's clear. There's a lot more going on, but Star Trek Picard is borrowing so heavily from Battlestar Galactica that it's alarming. It rehashes these story features. The concept of unaware, unactivated synthetics with lookalikes, the exact phrase destroyer of worlds as a prophecy. A female apparently holds the role but is conflicted. There is a legend of a historically reoccurring and inevitable cycle of fear and organicide. The Battlestar Galactica reboot had the sense to not bring back the Daggett. Too bad Fandering hit a new low by featuring Spot 2. The final scene came off just as cheesy as in 1978. Their interpretation of the Circle of Grief was unexpected, as were how the orchids foreshadowed in the show intro every week panned out. May I infer from the lack of response 27 hours after it dropped that this episode was a letdown. I hope everybody's feeling okay otherwise. Jim. Thanks, Jim, for that. I definitely agree with you. I think there was a drop of the ball here for this penultimate episode, and given that it has a part 2, to an extent, I'm not too fussed whether they take elements from Battlestar Galactica, because I think any story talking about sort of synthetic or robotics taking on humans or organics, I'm sure Battlestar Galactica has effectively borrowed from another tale of that. So
Blade Runner? Like we talked about them earlier on, Blade Runner and Terminator are 2 examples of this whole concept. It's not a new concept, but as of right now, as of episode 9, done better in those 2 places, I suppose. So Battlestar Galactica did do it over 5 seasons as well. So rather than over a couple of episodes here. So I think I know what you mean. To be honest, Jim, it does really matter where you look. On our particular feed on Facebook, we do get most of our feedback in on Fridays and Saturdays. So depending on when we record is when you'll see the feedback from our listeners for these episodes. I have seen people being absolutely in love with this episode. People that really, really enjoyed it. And that's possibly to do with what you're saying, your trademark phrase, the fandering, that this show does occasionally. You know, having Brent Spiner back in the show is a massively important thing to some fans of Star Trek Next Generation, and they'll forgive a lot of things that happen in the episode for bringing him back. Having Spot the cat in there is again something that a lot of fans really will enjoy and find really interesting. And I feel like I'm one of them sometimes on this show. I absolutely love being pandered to as a fan of a show. I want to see things that I recognize from the previous shows, to know that I'm in the same universe as the original show was in, because otherwise, why have the name slapped on it if you're not going to be in the universe? But the things that I have a problem with have a lot less to do with the pandering that's there for fans, because as I say, you're trying to get fans to enjoy the show, so pander to them all you need to. But the things that just seemed weird in the show is exactly as John pointed out. Some of the writing in the show just seemed a little off, as if they had written it before they knew what the characters were. Maybe they wrote 3 or 4 months before they had the idea of some of the characters in their head, and it didn't make sense. Maybe we need to say goodbye to Picard in this way from Raffi, who we know is a completely different character, who wouldn't be thanking Picard for all of the wonderful things he did, because he didn't do anything wonderful as such.
Yeah, at least not in the last 15 years. But, I think as well, I am with you about the unexpected use of the orchids. But I loved it. I thought it was, I just thought it was a really beautiful, kind of nice concept of these flowers coming from the planet to envelop these attacking ships.
Yeah.
It really did feel like if, the flower power hippies of the 60s, could stop a war, this is how they would do it. Mm-hmm. They would send enveloping flowers to take the guns, grenades.
Absolutely.
But again,
image around the Vietnam War, wasn't there, with the flower going into the gun barrel?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that really does again go back to a bit of a nostalgic element around the going to a unknown planet, making first contact with this paradise, this community.
Yeah, exactly.
And I thought this was really a nice element of this episode.
Yeah. One other thing, Jim, you mentioned the Destroyer of Worlds being used in Battlestar Galactica. Isn't it weird? I watched all Battlestar Galactica twice. And for some reason, I didn't connect the Destroyer of Worlds with Battlestar Galactica. I connected it with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., because that's what the character of Quake is called, is the Destroyer of Worlds. There's a prophecy about her destroying the planet, basically, for a whole 2 seasons. And maybe it's because I've seen S.H.I.E.L.D. more recently. That's where I instantly connected the phrase with, is it being, Quake wrecking the world or killing everybody on Earth because she's the Destroyer of Worlds. So for some reason I didn't make that connection between the two things, but maybe I need to go and watch Battlestar Galactica again.
The reboot was great.
Any excuse,
really.
Yeah, yes.
Loved it.
Do you remember the Daggett that Jim's mentioned?
Yes.
The dog robot, which they did not bring back for the series.
Thank goodness. I am totally with you on that, Jim, for sure.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the feedback, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
Next piece of feedback comes in from Brian Malosh from the Star Trek Picard podcast on Talk Through Media. Brian says, I'm not sure what time you guys record, but hopefully I'm not too late. This was my least favorite episode this season. I didn't like the plot twist of the Synth Alliance coming to destroy the organics. That feels too much like Control from Discovery. I especially didn't like Sutra doing the mind meld. How a synth could do that is dubious. The Orchids are just plain dumb in my opinion. They're a one-use defensive weapon, which is just not practical for orbital defenses. Oh, and why does a poke in the eye cause a synth to die? There were some good moments. It was certainly a surprise to see Brent Spiner as yet another Sung. The Raffi says I love you scene was great, though I think someone who hasn't read The Last Best Hope wouldn't feel like it was earned. Prediction: the Golem will be used for Picard, not Sung, and Seven will be a permanent member of the cast. Or, and this would be a total WTF moment, Picard dies, Seven becomes the lead character, and the show continues as Star Trek 7 of 9. That's it for me.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you for that feedback. Yeah, definitely. There's a number of points around Sutra doing the mind meld. Mm-hmm. Certainly, the death of a synth just with, the eye being taken out. I agree with you. I certainly think the 2 points where maybe I'm of an opposite persuasion. I kind of loved the Orchid defense. I just thought it was fun. And I thought it was a neat idea, around sort of taking down the power of the ship and bringing it down to the planet, that they may survive that re-entry or not. But, it felt, as I say, a nod to the hippie 60s.
Flower power, man.
Exactly. Flower power. I think with the Raffi moment to Picard, I haven't read The Last Best Hope. So maybe that's why it did, jar with me. And I do think, we've done the, Prelude comics here, and Derek's read, that book as well. Mm-hmm. But I also, however much these are intertwined, not everyone gets to look at the book, not everyone gets to look at the comics. And so I do feel that there has to be some internal, consistency within just the series.
Yeah.
And for me, it wasn't so much that she said, I love you. I think she's absolutely entitled to say that, but it needed to come with a qualification around how she had been abandoned or just neglected by Picard for the 10, 15 years after he resigned and after the attack on Mars. But I get your point. It is a nice nod for Raffi for sure.
It is definitely, but I will say, having read the book, and I don't think this is spoilers now because there are bits of it in the show, Raffi leaves Earth and goes and joins Picard, leaving behind her family, who eventually she gets divorced from her husband and loses contact with her son, which we've seen in the show with Gabe. And then Picard leaves her behind 15 years ago on the show, as he retires and she effectively gets fired from her position in the Federation. So I don't think that's spoilers, but that's most of what I got from the book, other than the fact that they were very good friends. It seems like Picard actually didn't do a huge amount for her. So this line from her going, "I love you for everything you've done for me," felt unearned in the show, as we said. But I don't know. I just think it didn't work. I think you could have fixed it with just one line of dialogue, as we mentioned earlier on in the podcast. But thanks so much for your feedback, Brian. In tribute to you and your own podcast, which you do have a section called Not Good Enough, I think your feelings for the episode speak loudly as
Not good enough, damn it! Not good enough!
Great stuff. Some more feedback from Claire Owens. In my opinion, the weakest episode of the season so far. It felt and looked very 1970s, 80s, and not in a good way. What the hell was up with those flowers? I have so many faults to pick with this episode that I don't really know where to begin. This episode felt like season 8 of Game of Thrones. Ooh, yeah, thanks, Claire, for those thoughts. I'm definitely with you. I think this is the weakest episode. My out of 5 certainly suggests that. I gave it a 3. It's still a recommend, but certainly I think it's the weakest episode. I think it's got some nice points within this. I certainly feel it felt very original Star Trek in terms of coming to this paradise and it turning sour very quickly, and also just the episodic feel of this nature, which is weird because it's a part 1. Like the tee up for the next episode actually came in the post-credits trailer for the next part, which you don't always get. You certainly don't get that on Amazon Prime here where we watch it. So, just having all the ships lined up, whilst I loved that scene of seeing all the warbirds, and Commander O on the bridge of the lead, that just really wasn't enough. In a sense, it would have been nice to have intercut with Commander O and those warbirds throughout this episode to get that sense of increasing threat coming towards, this paradise planet. And again, I have to disagree. I love the flowers. But I get it's not everyone's cup of tea.
Oh yeah.
But
there were so many other things to complain about. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think I was coming at it from a visual point of view and from the idea of the spaceships that use solar sails. I thought they looked really cool, and in sense of that nod to the hippie 60s, as I've said before, it just felt that yes, a hippie commune of synths, like it was kind of shown, it made sense that they would do it in that way and give everyone at least an equal chance of survival, even though they are attacking.
Yeah. There is a couple of little references in the episode actually that I meant to point out when Brian mentioned his feedback. They talk about how quickly they can build them. They've only got 2 days before the Romulans arrive, and already within 1 day they've built another 15 of these. So that is one good thing, I suppose, about the defense. They're not growing them for 100 years from seed or something. So they're actually being built and come around really quickly. And the other thing as well, when they arrive in the system for the first time, they say there's no spaceships around at all. And I think they mentioned that they only ever had one ship, which is the one that was sent off with Beautiful Flower and Jana, who were sent off in the spaceship. So there's no spaceships in the solar system at all. So planetary defense didn't seem to be something they were too worried about. And they could build this defense system reasonably quickly, but not within 2 days. Anyway, everybody seems to be against us, John. Nobody seems to like the planetary flowers.
I do get it. I think it's a real visual jar compared to the rest of the season, where it is all space hardware and blasters.
Yeah.
And this is a very different aesthetic. And I'm not saying it's necessarily consistent. And I do, in part, I do agree with Claire and Brian around the flowers, but I just thought, okay, they're going to go with that. So I'm happy enough. And I think, as Brian said, and I think as Claire have said, I think there's way too many other faults to pick with the episode. And I think in particular, as we've just said on the podcast, it's the writing. I don't think the writers have teed this up well. I think the acting is solid, as you would expect from this cast. Visually, it looks great, but they've tried to cram too much into too little time. And when you think about it, you could have actually been on this planet a little sooner, I think. And again, I think it comes back to the warbirds. Isn't that such a great visual interpretation to show them coming at towards this planet at different stages, with little snippets on the bridge with Commander O and so on, to give that sense of forebodance and the imminent threat. Just saying 2 days, grand, but then, I know they're synth, but where's the mass panic, at least from some of the others? And, they can't build these flowers, which they seem to do 15 within at least a few hours, yet they're about to build a beacon from whatever, and they can do that in 2 days. Yeah. So it's just kind of like...
You can build technology really fast.
Yeah, but, it's still like, okay, like... I think this could have been done a lot better from the writers, to be honest.
I guess the mass panic is exemplified by the fact that we have them rising up and going to contact another group of synths to join them to take out all organics. I guess that's kind of the part of mass panic, because they're all being whipped up into this frenzy of we need to get all synths versus all organics. But you're right, it just needed a little more time to build. One thing about the writing, I will say, I wonder what the CGI guys thought when they got the page delivered to them going, you need to create massive flowers that could pull a Borg ship out of the sky. They did a great job of developing that, I suppose, but that's the idea that's given to them. They have to do it. So.
Well, you can imagine them in a state of the US where cannabis is still illegal, and them going, oh, that's California.
Here you go.
Apologies, my American friends.
Thanks so much for that, Claire. We also got a bit of feedback from Robert Phillips. He says, I really, really hope this is the sea of fun receding before the tsunami of delight that episode 10 will bring. I adored the synth exploring the lines on Picard's face and the I love you exchange. And I'm thinking the golem is too much of a setup for spoons or a picklard. Maybe we can get a Raffi switch in now that we've had the declarations of love. So I'm taking that. I did reach out to Bob just to clarify. I'm taking that he means Raffi will be the one to decide that Picard will live on in the body of this golem that they describe. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I love the idea that, we have, Jean-Luc Picarded, within the golem. I do think that's a real option here, but I am wondering, again, a bit like with Brian mentioning that this golem will be for Picard. I'm wondering to what extent it will be soon, or even, to bring back Bruce Maddox. Yeah. And I think I'm leaning more towards the conversation, with Riker and Deanna, at their home where they indicated that their son died because there wasn't able to be tests done on synthetics, which could have most likely provided a cure for his particular condition.
My theory. Yay.
Yeah. And so with the synthetics here, that there is a chance in order to explore cures, for Picard. It would be an interesting thing to make someone so iconic into effectively a synthetic, or dare I say it, Data Mark II, which I can see the initial attraction of that because Data and, Picard were, so close. And this has been a huge, motivational part of this, season for Jean-Luc. So it could be interesting, but I think Soong talks about his urgency in trying to get this mind transfer, which suggests maybe there's something wrong with him, or as you had said, Derek, that his conversation with Dr. Jurati around, you've taken a life, maybe now create a life. It could be that Bruce Maddox has got his mind downloaded, which can be transferred. So she's able to bring back her partner.
Yeah. Yeah. I just don't see Picard agreeing to having his mind downloaded into a body to live on forever. I don't know whether that seems like an odd choice for the character of Picard, because he feels like he's gotten to the point where he knows he's going to die and he's accepted that, I suppose, in a way. He kind of says, I'll live on as if I'm not a sick man. But would he choose to live forever within the body of a synth? Or will somebody be forcing his mind into the synth?
Well, that maybe is something to explore in season 2.
Yeah.
I really hope they don't explore it in part 2 of this, because otherwise it will just be crowded. They'll be crowded out from the other stuff. So it would make no sense here.
Absolutely. Thanks again for all of your feedback.
Yep. Thanks so much for the feedback, fellow Trekkers and Trekkies.
one more thing to do before we head off for this episode. John, let's go to the pub. Which we can't do in Ireland at the moment. All the pubs closed.
Yes.
Before St. Patrick's.
Yeah,
this week,
absolutely.
so we've not been into a pub in over a week.
It's
That's
brutal.
Shocking.
Yeah, in most places, the hand sanitizer has been stripped from the supermarket shelves. It has here, along with the tissues and the bog roll, but in as well, dare I say it, when we were looking for a few drinky poos, it was looking a little bare there in the supermarket as well.
Was. Nobody can go out, no pubs or anything to go to, but we can go to 10 Forward for a pub quiz.
Yes.
John, what's our 10 Forward pub quiz question?
Welcome to the 10 Forward pub quiz question. Unfortunately, we're on the synth world, so they only seem to bring them water. So that's a little, so maybe you want to add, I don't know, a little bit of cordial into that synthetic water from the planet Coppelius. Yes, so quiz question here. How many Romulan ships are heading to Coppelius to destroy the synth world? And for a bonus question, because I love them so much and because all the tables in 10 Forward have got a flower in them. How many giant bogey flowers do the synths send up to intercept La Serena, the Borg Cube, and Narek's Snakehead ship? Yes.
Interesting. Okay, so there's a number of times the flowers are mentioned throughout the episode, so it's the initial attack on the La Serena, Borg Cube, and the Narek Snakehead. By the way, I love that his ship is the Snakehead. We have the Romulan bird of prey, which is the big ship that's out there, and this little ship's called the Snakehead. I think that's just a cool name. But you're the bad guys, though, if you're calling your ships bird of prey and Snakehead, right?
Definitely.
John, do you want to give the question one more time?
I will do. So then, fellow Trekkers and Trekkies, here is the pub quiz question for episode 9. How many Romulan ships are heading to Coppelius to destroy the synth world? And as a bonus question, and how many giant bogey flowers do the synths send up to intercept La Serena, the Borg Cube, and Narek's Snakehead ship? Answers on a postcard, fellow Trekkers and Trekkies.
No, emails, John, emails.
Yes,
emails to feedback@tvpodcastindustry with your answers to all of the pub quiz questions.
I just like send your answers in on a postcard.
That's because we're old.
I know, it is. But it's good to get back to ye oldie technology sometimes.
Except we don't have a postal address.
Exactly. Please send in your emails, and of course you'll be in with a chance to win the Making of Star Trek Picard book. There is also a family-crested Picard beer steiner, because of course this is a pub quiz. This is 10 Forward, and you do need something to drink that cool, ice-cold beer in summer, especially if you're housed up at home for any length of time. And we also have a Starfleet pin badge as well. So please send in those emails to have a chance of getting those quiz prizes. Looking forward to seeing those answers coming in. We're certainly getting a few.
Absolutely, yeah. Want to get everybody to enter the contest before next week. We will have one final question in our season finale episode, Star Trek Picard, episode 10. In Arcadia Ego Part 2, obviously. Written by Michael Chabon, directed by Akiva Goldsman once again. And then we will do our final wrap-up episode of Star Trek Picard, where we'll go through all of the answers about a week after, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it'll give you enough time to get all the answers in for all 10 episodes of the season. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. You can hear so much more of us if you want to. You can go over to patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries. Support us over there and you can get access to all of our Penny Dreadful rewatch podcasts. You can also go over to dreadfulpodcast.com, where the episodes are releasing a little bit more slowly over there if you want to join us for those episodes of Penny Dreadful. We hope you do.
Absolutely. And please remember to share the podcast, because that is sharing the love. Please stay subscribed, rate us, leave a review, share with friends. It is great to have you guys and gals on board with your feedback within the group and everything else. It's great to get your thoughts for sure.
Definitely. Bye-bye, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers. Keep watching the stars.
Yeah, as always, fellow Trekkers and Trekkies, it's a pleasure speaking with you. We'll be back again with you next week. But in the meantime, remember, keep watching, keep listening, and engage.
Bye.
Bye.